The air in the alien forest was heavy and warm, carrying the strange smell of plants that glowed faintly in the dim light. Tall silver trees rose into the sky, their wide leaves shifting and rustling with every soft breeze. Jake walked carefully, boots pressing into the mossy ground. His eyes scanning the surroundings. He had been traveling alone for days, trying to find a safer route through this strange planet. The sky above was a deep shade of red, with two moons hanging low and bright. Every sound in the forest seemed unfamiliar clicks, hums, and distant growls that made the hair on his neck stand up. Jake had learned to move quietly, to stay alert, and to keep his hand near the short blade strapped to his side. The weapon was not much against this planet's predators, but it was all he had. He had been warned by traders that the forest was home to dangerous creatures, ones that hunted, even in daylight, but so far, he had only seen small lizard-like things darting between the trees. That calm ended when he heard it, a sound that froze him in place. It was a scream, high-pitched and desperate, cutting through the forest air like a blade. Jake turned toward the sound without thinking. The scream came again, closer this time. Mixed with a deep, rumbling snarl, his heart pounded as he pushed through glowing ferns, brushing past vines that coiled like living snakes. Then he saw her, a small figure trapped against a large rock. She was not human. Her skin was pale, almost silver, her eyes a bright, unnatural green that reflected the light. She wore torn clothes and her body trembled, towering over her. Was a beast unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It had the body of a massive cat, but its face was stretched and twisted, with tusks jutting out from both sides of its jaw. The creature's fur was black with streaks of orange, and its claws dug into the ground as it prepared to strike. Jake's instincts took over. He didn't have time to think about why the girl was here or what she was. All he knew was that if he hesitated, she would die. He let out a loud shout to draw the beast's attention. The monster's head snapped toward him, its glowing yellow eyes narrowing. It growled, a sound so deep it vibrated in Jake's chest. Then it lunged. Jake dodged to the side. Feeling the rush of air as claws missed him by inches, he slashed with his blade, cutting into the creature's side. But the wound only seemed to enrage it. The beast spun, swiping its massive paw. Knocking Jake back into a tree, pain shot through his ribs, but he forced himself to stand. The girl was still pressed against the rock. Eyes wide with terror, Jake stepped between her and the beast, gripping his blade tighter. The creature lunged again, and this time Jake rolled under its strike. Slashing at its exposed belly, the smell of blood filled the air, sharp and metallic. The beast roared and reared back, but Jake didn't give it a chance to recover. With a final surge of strength, he drove his blade deep into its side. The creature let out a horrible, gurgling cry before collapsing onto the mossy ground. For a moment, the forest went quiet. Jake stood over the body, breathing hard, sweat running down his face. Slowly, he turned to look at the girl. She was staring at him, her eyes wide, not just with fear, but with something else. Surprise. He stepped forward cautiously, holding out his hand to show he meant no harm. She didn't move at first, then took a small step toward him. Her voice was soft and shaky when she spoke, her words carrying a strange accent. You fought for me, she whispered. Jake nodded, not sure what else to say. She looked at him for another long moment, then said something that made him freeze. Now? I belong to you, Jake blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. Her voice was certain. Her green eyes locked on his. He didn't understand why she would say that, but before he could ask, deep growl echoed in the distance. More creatures. We're out there. Jake glanced at the darkening sky. Night was coming fast. Whatever she meant, there would be time to figure it out later. For now, he had to get them both to safety. He reached out his hand again, and this time, She took it without hesitation. Together, they turned and disappeared into the glowing forest. The shadows following close behind. Jake moved quickly through the glowing forest, the alien girl's small hand gripping his tightly. The path ahead was uneven, roots twisting like ropes under his boots behind them. The growl they had heard earlier came again, this time closer. He didn't dare look back. The girl stumbled once, but Jake caught her, steadying her before pulling her along. They had to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the dead beast before other predators found them. After several minutes of running, Jake spotted a cluster of large stones forming a natural shelter. He guided her toward it, ducking under a low arch of rock. Inside, the space was small but dry, with a patch of soft moss in one corner. It would do for now. Jake set his blade beside him and crouched down, looking over the girl for injuries. Her clothes were torn, but her pale skin only had shallow scratches. Still, she was trembling from head to toe. "You're safe for now," Jake said quietly. Her bright green eyes studied him, as if she were trying to decide something important. Then, without warning, she leaned closer and spoke in a low voice. "You fought for me," she whispered. Again, her words carried a strange weight, as though they were more than just thanks. Jake nodded, unsure what she expected him to say. Then she added, in a tone that was almost shy, "Now I belong to you." Jake froze. He had no idea what she meant. The way she said it didn't sound like a casual phrase. It sounded like a vow. Her voice was steady this time, and her eyes didn't waver from his. "What do you mean, belong to me?" he asked. She tilted her head slightly, like she didn't understand why he was questioning it. "In my people's way," she said slowly. "Life for life. We follow the one who saves us, always." Jake blinked. It was starting to make sense. Maybe in her culture, saving someone's life created a permanent bond. He looked away for a moment, running a hand through his hair. He hadn't saved her expecting anything in return, but now she seemed completely certain that they were connected. She sat cross-legged in front of him, still watching his every move. There was no fear in her anymore, only a strange calm. Outside, the forest noises grew louder. Something screamed in the distance, followed by a crash of breaking branches. Jake tightened his grip on his blade. He didn't like staying in one place for too long, but moving at night might be worse. The girl noticed his concern and said softly, "We must not go out after moonrise." "The hunters come then?" "Hunters?" Jake asked. She nodded slowly, her eyes darkening. "They are not beasts," she said. "They walk like us. But they are worse." Jake didn't know who she meant, but the way her voice dropped made him believe her. He leaned against the rock wall, thinking they would need to leave before dawn and find somewhere safer. Somewhere those hunters wouldn't reach easily. The girl shifted closer to him, pulling her knees to her chest. "Do you have a name?" Jake asked after a pause. She hesitated before answering. "Lyra." The name was soft, almost musical. He nodded. "I'm Jake." She repeated his name slowly, as if testing the sound, then gave a small smile. The silence between them was broken only by the soft rustle of the forest. Jake studied her for a moment, realizing she couldn't be much older than 16 by human measure. She was small and light, but there was something in her gaze that suggested she had survived more than most. Her hair, fine and white like snow, caught the faint blue glow from the moss. "Why were you alone out there?" Jake asked quietly. Her smile faded. "My clan left me," she said simply. "Why?" He pressed. "They said I am too weak," she whispered, looking away. Jake felt a flash of anger from what he had seen. This world was dangerous, even for the strong. To leave someone like her alone was as good as killing them. "You're not weak," he said firmly. She looked up at him, surprised by his tone. "Not anymore," he added. Something shifted in her eyes, not just gratitude, but a spark of trust. She didn't reply, but she moved a little closer, her shoulder brushing his. Outside, the forest howled again. But inside the small shelter, a strange sense of safety settled between them. After a while, Jake adjusted his pack to make a pillow for her. "Rest," he told her. "We leave early." Lyra lay down reluctantly. Still watching him until her eyes finally closed, Jake stayed awake, listening to the forest and the distant, unsettling noises. His thoughts kept returning to her words. "I belong to you." He didn't understand it completely, but he knew one thing. She thought he would leave her behind. She was wrong. Whatever dangers this world had, he would face them for her. The first light of dawn crept into the forest, painting the silver trees in shades of pale gold. Jake was already awake, his blade resting across his lap. The forest had been restless all night, full of calls, growls, and the snapping of branches. But nothing had entered the rocky shelter. Beside him, Lyra stirred, her green eyes opening slowly. She sat up, brushing her white hair from her face, and looked at him like she was making sure he was still there. "We have to move," Jake said quietly. Lyra nodded without hesitation. She moved with a light step, but she stayed close to him, her small hand sometimes brushing his arm as they walked. Jake noticed she kept glancing to the shadows between the trees. Every time the forest fell silent, her shoulders stiffened. "What is it?" he asked at one point. She didn't answer right away, then said, "This place. It belongs to thee." Hunters. Jake slowed his pace. He had heard that word before from her, but now it carried a heavier meaning. "They track everything," she said. "They kill for sport. Not just for food." He thought of the masked figures she had described. Predators who walked like people but were worse than the beasts. The idea of being watched by intelligent killers in this endless forest made his skin crawl. The ground became softer underfoot, the moss giving way to patches of dark, wet soil here. The air was thick with a damp smell, and the trees grew closer together. From somewhere to their right came a sudden splash. Jake turned quickly, spotting movement in a shallow pool, long, snake-like creatures with transparent skin. There, bones glowing faintly, they darted beneath the surface. Disappearing, Lyra moved closer to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They smell fear," she said. "If you fall in, they drag you down." They walked on, Jake's mind turning over the reality of this planet. Every corner, every shadow seemed to hide something that could kill. Even the plants had sharp edges or strange movements. Some vines twitched when he passed, reaching toward him before recoiling. It was clear now humans were not at the top of the food chain here. In this world, everything was predator or prey. And right now, he and Lyra were somewhere in between, after hours of walking. The forest thinned, revealing a ridge of jagged rocks ahead. Lyra pointed toward it, her voice gaining a little strength. "My people used to live there," she said. Jake could see the remains of structures, wooden frames, torn banners hanging limp in the breeze. It looked abandoned for years. "What happened to them?" he asked. Her gaze dropped to the ground. "They were taken," she said, "by the hunters." They reached the ridge and began climbing, the stone rough under their hands. Jake kept scanning the trees below, half expecting to see movement. At the top, they found a flat area with a better view of the forest. From here, Jake could see how massive it truly was, silver trunks stretching endlessly in every direction. But the beauty of the sight was broken by motion in the distance. Far away, a group of figures was moving between the trees. Even from here, he could see the glint of bone masks. "They've been following us," Jake said. Lyra nodded grimly. "They always follow." Jake scanned the area for shelter and spotted what looked like a ruined watchtower. It was leaning, but still standing, its base made of stone. They hurried toward it, the wind picking up around them. Inside, the air was cooler, and old carvings marked the walls. Lyra touched one of them, tracing the shape of a figure holding a spear. "This was where my clan stood guard," she said softly. Now, it was empty. Another sign of how far her people had fallen. They settled in the corner, sharing a small piece of dried food from Jake's pack. Lyra chewed slowly, her eyes distant. "When the hunters come," she said, "they don't stop until they take what they want." Jake met her gaze. "And what do they want now?" She hesitated, then said, "Me." Her voice was quiet, but there was no doubt in it. "They mark the weak," she explained. "They marked me long ago." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He didn't know why they wanted her, and it didn't matter. They weren't getting her. He looked out from the broken window of the tower, the forest swaying below, somewhere out there. The hunters were closing in, and somewhere inside him, a decision was already made. He wasn't going to run forever if they wanted a fight. They would get one, but for now, he stayed still, conserving energy. The day was slipping toward evening, and the shadows between the trees were growing deeper. Lyra leaned against the wall beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "You're not like the others," she said after a moment. "What others?" he asked. "The ones who would leave me behind." She replied. Jake didn't answer, but his hand tightened around the hilt of his blade. He wasn't going to let her see fear in his eyes. Not now, not ever. Outside, somewhere beyond the trees, a low horn sounded. It was deep and drawn out, a sound that didn't belong to any beast. Lyra's eyes widened. "The hunt has begun," she whispered. The sun dipped lower, turning the alien sky into streaks of orange and deep violet. From the broken watchtower, Jake scanned the forest again. Searching for any sign of movement, the horn's echo still lingered in his mind, a chilling reminder that the hunters were no longer just following, they were coming. Beside him, Lyra crouched near the stone floor, her hands working quickly to arrange bits of dry moss and splintered wood. With a small spark from Jake's fire starter, the materials caught, sending up a flickering glow. The warmth spread through the small shelter, pushing back the creeping cold of the night air. Jake sat across from her, watching the flames dance against the old carvings on the wall. For a moment, the fire made this ruined place feel less empty, less dangerous. Lyra leaned forward, holding her hands close to the heat, her silver hair catching the light. "You can rest," she said softly. "I will keep watch." Jake shook his head. "We both will." He didn't like the idea of either of them letting their guard down. Too much. The forest was too quiet now, almost as if it was holding its breath. As the fire crackled, Jake decided it was time to learn more. "You said the hunters marked you," he began. "Why? What makes you a target?" Lyra's eyes lowered, her fingers tracing the rough stone beneath her. "My people. We live by strength," she said slowly. "The strong protect the clan. The weak are left behind." Jake frowned. "That's not protection. That's cruelty." Her voice was steady, but there was a shadow in it. "When I was small, I could not keep up in the hunts. I could not fight well, so the elders declared me unworthy." She paused, looking into the flames as if seeing something far away. "They put a mark on me, a cut, here," she said, pointing to a faint scar along her neck. "It tells others that I am prey." Jake felt anger rise in his chest. She continued, "The hunters seek those with the mark. They believe it is their right to take us." Jake leaned forward, his voice low. "They don't have that right. Not while I'm here," for the first time since they met. Her lips curved into a small but genuine smile. The fire popped, sending tiny sparks into the air. Lyra reached into a small pouch tied to her belt. Pulling out a strip of dried fruit, she handed it to Jake without a word. He took it, realizing it might be the last of her food. "You should eat too," he said. "But..." She shook her head. "You fought for me. You eat? It was simple. But it carried the same strange loyalty she had shown since the moment in the forest. They ate in silence for a while, the fire's glow casting their shadows on the wall. Outside, the night creatures began their calls. Long warbling cries mixed with the rustle of unseen movements. Jake's hand stayed close to his blade. Lyra's gaze shifted toward the broken doorway, her ears twitching slightly at every sound. After a moment, she said, "You do not understand my words fully. When I said I belong to you," Jake looked up, meeting her eyes. "It is not just a debt," she said. "It is a bond. For life. I give my loyalty, my strength, and my trust to you. Always." Jake was silent for a moment, unsure how to respond. He hadn't asked for this, but he could see in her eyes that it wasn't something she offered lightly. "Where I come from," he said slowly, "we don't claim people. But we protect the ones who matter." She tilted her head, studying his face. "Then I will matter to you," she said simply. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Jake didn't argue. The fire began to burn lower, and Jake added more wood. The warmth filled the small space, but outside, the forest still pressed in. Dark and full of unseen eyes, Lyra shifted closer to him, not in fear, but in comfort. "You have fought a beast," she said quietly. "But fighting the hunters is different. They think, they plan. They enjoy the chase." Jake met her gaze. "Then we make them regret chasing us." Her eyes brightened, and for the first time there was no trace of fear there, only a spark of determination. The night dragged on, filled with distant sounds. A howl, a shriek, the low beating of wings overhead. Once, Jake thought he saw movement beyond the doorway, but when he stepped forward, there was nothing. The hunters were out there. He could feel it. Every instinct told him they were circling, waiting for the right moment. Lyra didn't sleep, and neither did he. By the time the first pale light of dawn touched the broken tower, both were still sitting by the dying fire. Jake rose, stretching his stiff muscles. "We move at first light," he said. Lyra nodded. Tightening the strap on her pouch, the forest ahead was dangerous. The hunters were relentless. But with the fire gone and the truth between them spoken, Jake felt something shift. They were no longer just a human and an alien girl trying to survive. They were a team, bound not by chance, but by choice. And somewhere in the shadows of the forest, the hunters would soon learn that chasing prey could turn into being hunted. Themselves, the sun had barely touched the horizon when Jake and Lyra left the ruined watchtower. The forest was quiet, too quiet, as if every living thing had decided to hide. Even the wind had gone still, and each of their footsteps seemed louder than it should. Jake moved first, his blade in hand, scanning the path ahead. Lyra followed. Close behind, her steps light and careful, her eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. They had been walking for less than an hour when Jake felt it, the sense of being watched. It was not just the usual unease of the forest. It was sharper, heavier, like invisible eyes pressing into his back. He glanced over his shoulder and caught it. Movement, a shadow slipping between two silver trunks, too tall and too silent too. "Be any beast, they're here," he murmured. Lyra didn't ask who, she already knew. "The hunters," she whispered. Her voice trembling, they quickened their pace. But the forest around them seemed to close in. The paths they had taken before now twisted in ways that didn't make sense. The silver leaves above rattled faintly, even though there was no wind. Jake's instincts screamed at him. They were being herded. He stopped suddenly. Looking in all directions, shapes were appearing in the distance, dark figures wearing bone masks. Their movements slow but deliberate. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. They knew their prey had nowhere to go. Lyra's breathing grew fast, her hand gripping Jake's arm. "They want to scare us," she said. "They enjoy the fear before the chase." Jake scanned the ground, searching for higher ground or a defensible spot. His eyes caught a ridge of rocks up ahead, with a narrow gap between two boulders. "This way," he said, pulling her along. The hunters did not stop them. Instead, they fanned out, keeping their distance, but closing in step by step. They reached the gap and squeezed through, the stone scraping Jake's shoulder on the other side. The ground dipped into a shallow clearing surrounded by high rock walls. It was both good and bad, a place they could defend, but also a place where escape would be hard. Jake knelt quickly, pulling dry moss and sticks from his pack. "Help me start a fire," he said. Lyra obeyed without question, striking the spark as he arranged. The fuel, within seconds, flames licked upward, casting a warm glow across the clearing. The hunters stopped just outside the gap, their bone masks catching the firelight. They stood motionless, as if deciding when to move. Jake stood, blade ready, his heartbeat steady now. One of the hunters stepped forward, tilting its head as if studying him. Then, in a voice deep and strange, it spoke words Jake didn't understand. Lyra stepped forward slightly, answering in her own language. Her tone sharp, the hunter's head turned toward her, and though the mask hid its face, Jake could feel the weight of its gaze. "What did it say?" Jake asked quietly. "It says you will die tonight," Lyra replied without looking at him. Jake tightened his grip on his blade. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The hunter tilted its head again, then raised a curved spear. The others began to move forward, their steps slow and heavy. Jake stepped in front of Lyra, his voice low. "Stay behind me no matter what." The first hunter lunged, its spear aimed for Jake's chest. Jake sidestepped, grabbing the shaft and yanking it forward, pulling the hunter off balance. With a sharp strike, he drove his blade into the side of its neck. The hunter dropped, but two more stepped in immediately. Jake swung wide, forcing them back toward the fire. The flames flickered higher, as if feeding on the chaos, casting long shadows against the rock walls. One hunter tried to circle toward Lyra, but she grabbed a burning branch from the fire and swung it. The hunter hissed and retreated, its mask turning black where the fire touched it. Jake fought with precision, each move calculated. He ducked under a spear, slashed at an exposed leg, and kicked another hunter back into the gap. But for every one that fell, more seemed to take its place. It was not a wild rush. It was a slow, relentless pressure meant to wear him down. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Jake's arms ached. His breath came hard, but he refused to let them pass. Lyra stood beside him now, striking at any hunter that came close with her burning branch. The smell of smoke and blood filled the air. Finally, the hunters paused, stepping back as if called by some silent signal. One of them let out a low, echoing cry, and the others faded into the shadows beyond the gap. Jake stood still, waiting to see if it was a trick, but the forest was quiet again. Only the fire crackled. Lyra dropped the branch, her chest rising and falling quickly. "They will come again," she said softly. "They never stop after the first hunt." Jake looked at her and nodded. "Then we'll be ready." The night was far from over. The hunters were still out, they're circling. But Jake knew something had changed. They had stood their ground once, and they could do it again. And if the hunters thought they were chasing prey, they would soon learn that their prey could fight back. The fire burned low, casting a soft orange glow over the small clearing. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and scorched wood, mixed with the faint metallic temps of blood. Jake sat on a flat rock near the flames, his blade resting across his knees. His arms ached from the fight, every muscle heavy, but his eyes stayed fixed on the dark gap in the rocks where the hunters had vanished. Lyra sat beside him, her knees drawn to her chest, her green eyes watching the same spot. She was quiet, but her breathing was steady now, no longer ragged with fear. "They'll be back," Jake said softly, more to himself than to her. "Yes," Lyra replied, her voice calm. "But they will not take me while you live." Jake glanced at her, surprised by the certainty in her tone. Her gaze was steady, without a trace of doubt. It was the same look she had given him the moment she said she belonged to him. He realized then that to her, this was not just survival. This was a promise she had already accepted. They ate what little food they had left, a few scraps of dried meat and fruit. Jake gave her the larger portion, but she tried to refuse. "You need strength," she said. "So do you," he replied. Pushing it into her hands, she hesitated, then accepted, chewing slowly while keeping her eyes on him. There was no awkwardness in her watching. It was as if she was memorizing him, storing every detail in her mind when the fire was no more. Then glowing embers, Jake began setting up a few traps with sharpened sticks and small rocks. Lyra helped without needing to be told what to do. Her movements were quick and practiced, her hands steady. Jake noticed that even though she was small and light, she worked without complaint. It struck him how easily she moved alongside him, how she seemed to understand what he needed before he spoke. When they finished, they sat again by the embers. "Why did you not leave me when the hunters came?" Lyra asked suddenly, her voice quiet but curious. Jake frowned. "Why would I leave you?" "Others would," she said simply. "It is the way of many. If danger comes, they save themselves." Jake shook his head. "That's not my way." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Then I am lucky." The forest around them was alive with distant noises, soft rustles, faint growls, and the occasional flap of massive wings somewhere high above. But here in the clearing, a strange peace had settled. Lyra leaned slightly toward him, her shoulder brushing his. "You remind me of something from my people's old stories," she said. "What's that?" Jake asked. "A protector," she replied. "One who fights not for reward. A key, but because it is right." Jake looked into the glowing embers, unsure how to answer. He had never thought of himself as anything like that, but maybe to her, he was. Hours passed, the moonlight painting the silver leaves above them in a pale, ghostly glow. Jake stayed awake, listening, while Lyra rested with her head leaning against his arm. She didn't sleep deeply. Every so often her eyes would open, scanning the shadows before closing again, yet she stayed close, as if the contact itself kept her grounded. Jake didn't move away. He had carried people out of danger before, but never like this, never with this strange sense that they were bound together now. When the first pale light of dawn began to break through the trees, Jake stirred her gently. "We need to move," he said. She sat up immediately, adjusting the strap of her pouch. Before they left, Jake checked the traps. One had been triggered, the sharp sticks stained with dark blood. "Something tried to come in," he said. Lyra nodded. "They test our defenses. They look for weakness as they walked." The forest seemed different in the early morning light. The shadows were thinner, but the silence was heavier. Lyra stayed at his side, matching his pace. At one point, she reached out and took his hand. It wasn't in fear this time, it was in trust. Jake didn't pull away. The small weight of her hand felt like a silent agreement. They were in this together, no matter what came next. They stopped briefly near a stream to drink. The cold water refreshing after the long night. Lyra crouched beside him, cupping water in her hands and sipping it carefully. When she looked up, her green eyes caught the morning light, and for a brief moment, Jake saw something there that hadn't been before. Hope. It was faint, but it was real. And in that moment, Jake understood something. This wasn't just about keeping her alive anymore. It was about giving her a reason to keep living. As they continued deeper into the forest, Jake thought about the days ahead. The hunters would not stop. That much was certain. But he also knew he would not stop either. Lyra had been left behind. Once, abandoned by the ones who should have protected her. That would never happen again, not while he was breathing. By the time the sun climbed higher, they had put miles between themselves and the watchtower. But Jake knew the hunters were still out there, moving in silence, tracking them. Lyra glanced at him, her voice quiet but firm. "If they come again, we fight together." Jake met her gaze. "Together," he agreed. It wasn't just a word, it was a pact, and as they walked side by side, through a world that seemed determined to destroy them, Jake realized something that made him grip his blade tighter. The hunters might see them as prey, but prey that fought back was something far more dangerous. The sun was low again, casting long shadows through the silver forest. Jake and Lyra moved in silence. Their steps steady, but tense. They had covered miles since morning, but the feeling of being watched had never left them. Every so often, Jake would catch a flicker of movement in the trees behind them. The hunters were close now, closer than before. He could almost feel their breath on the back of his neck. They reached the edge of the forest and found themselves standing before a narrow ravine. The drop was deep, a jagged cut in the earth with a slow stream far below. A single fallen tree lay across it, forming the only bridge. Jake's eyes scanned the area. If they crossed, the hunters would follow. If they stayed here, the hunters would attack from all sides. Either way, this was where the fight would happen. He looked at Lyra, and she nodded without hesitation. "This is the place," she said softly. They crossed the tree trunk carefully. The bark slick under their boots. On the other side, the ground rose into a rocky slope dotted with sharp boulders. Jake quickly began pulling loose rocks together. Creating a barrier, Lyra helped her movements quick and precise. They had only minutes before the hunters appeared. As the last stone was set, the first horn sounded deep and haunting. It rolled through the air like a warning or a promise. From the trees, they emerged, bone masks glinting in the fading light, spears and curved blades in their hands. There were more than Jake had ever seen at once, at least 10, maybe more. They moved slowly, spreading out to encircle the slope. One of them stepped forward, larger than the rest, its mask carved with deep grooves like scars. It raised its weapon and pointed directly at Lyra. Jake stepped in front of her, blade ready. "If they want you," he said quietly, "they go through me first." The leader let out a sharp cry, and the hunters surged forward. Jake moved to meet them, his blade flashing in the dying light. The first came in fast, spear thrust low. Jake sidestepped and slashed upward. Cutting deep into its arm, it staggered back. But another was already leaping toward him. He blocked with his forearm, feeling the shock of the blow run through his bones, and shoved the attacker back. Lyra stayed close, striking at any who came near with a sharpened stick she had taken from their traps. Her movements were small but quick, aimed at slowing the hunters so Jake could finish them. The fight was chaos. The hunters were relentless, moving with a predator's patience, but striking with deadly speed when the moment came. Jake's blade cut through the air again and again. Blood, dark and thick, stained the rocks. A spear grazed his side, burning as it tore through cloth and skin. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. 2 hunters tried to flank him, but Lyra darted forward, jabbing her stick into the leg of one and forcing it to stumble. Jake seized the opening, cutting both down in quick, brutal strikes. But there were still more. The leader moved in now, its steps slow and deliberate. It was taller than Jake by almost a head, its muscles shifting under dark armor made from bone. Jake met its first strike and felt the impact jar his shoulder. The leader's strength was immense. They traded blows, the clash of metal and bone ringing through the ravine. Finally, Jake saw an opening. He feinted left, then drove his blade deep into the leader's side. The creature let out a guttural roar and collapsed to its knees. The other hunters hesitated, glancing at their fallen leader. It was the moment Jake had been waiting for. He stepped forward, blood on his blade, his voice a low growl. Leave. Or join him for a long moment. No one moved. Then, one by one, the hunters stepped back, fading into the shadows of the forest. Within seconds, they were gone. Only the sound of the stream below remained. Jake lowered his blade and turned. To Lyra, she was breathing hard, her hands still gripping the sharpened stick. Her eyes met his, and for a moment neither spoke. Then she stepped closer, placing her small hand on his chest. "You saved me again," she whispered, "and I still belong to you." Jake gave a tired smile. "We belong to each other now." Her lips curved upward, a mix of relief and something deeper. They stood there for a moment, the wind shifting through the trees above. The fight was over, but the danger of this world was not still. Jake knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The hunters would remember this day, the day their prey stood and fought back. And somewhere in the endless silver forest, the story of the human and the marked girl would begin to spread. Not as a tale of prey and predator, but as a legend of survival and unbreakable bond.